Precisely 2 weeks before the country goes to the polls, the motion is, this House believes the United Kingdom should leave the European Union. I look to Dom Hopkins-Powell, Standing Committee, New College, to open the case for the proposition. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the Oxford Union. I stand before you tonight on the cusp of the defining moment of our generation. Whichever way this country votes on the 23rd of June will dictate the course of not only our own foreign policy and not only those of the remaining EU member states, but of pretty much every other of the world's great powers for decades to come. I stand here with no illusions about the importance of the moment that stands in front of us and the debate surrounding it. But I stand here, above all, urging you to go out on the 23rd of June and vote and have your say. I think it right, first of all, to address a few rumours about me speaking here tonight, and specifically that I am here as a walking, talking oxymoron, a modern linguist who, touch wood, will be studying German and Italian abroad in Germany and Italy next year, speaking on behalf of Brexit. What greater hypocrisy could there be, I hear you ask? And yet, I put it to you that to be anti-EU is not necessarily to be anti-European. No, quite the opposite. Let's be quite clear. The notion that the continent of Europe, that I love, and in Germany and Italy in particular, with all its constituent peoples, cultures and languages, and the political club known as the European Union are one, equatable and the same, is both lazy and a fallacy. A love of Europe and advocation of Brexit are by no means mutually exclusive, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope to show you this fact tonight. In fact, the EU does not stand for the ideals, values and diversity that I believe make Europe the wonderful place that it is. The EU is not and cannot become a democracy. Instead, it provides the most hospitable ecosystem in the developed world for corporations, tax-dodging political elites, and organized crime. It has an executive so powerful that it crushed the left-wing government of Greece, the Syriza government, a legislature so ineffectual that it cannot effectively determine laws or control its own civil service, and a judiciary that in the Laval and Viking judgments made sure that the workers' right to strike was subordinate to an employer's right to do business freely. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I will make the case tonight that for the following 3 reasons, we are better out of the European Union. The first reason, the EU has become far too bureaucratic, undemocratic and unwieldy. The second, that far from being the cross-national, cross-party utopia it is often made out to be, and that the first vision of it was, it is in fact an institution that prioritizes the wants, the needs, the desires of certain members over others, and that the EU benefits multinational corporations and big business over the interests of its citizens. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce the opposition tonight. Opening the case for the opposition, we have my dear friend, Mr. Nikolai Koshikov, second-year economics and management student, a great friend of mine, and a student from Exeter College, and the current treasurer of the Oxford Union. Hello, yes.
Second-year PPE, sir. Thank you very much.
That's all over. But that, in fact, that point of information backs up exactly what I was going to say about Nikolai, because he is one of the most efficient, one of the most driven people that I know. The thirst for winning, the thirst for getting things right, he has taken this to an almost mechanical level. And so I have, after spending a lot of time with him this term, come to the conclusion that he is, in fact, the Terminator. Sent back in time by our machine overlords to win union elections. Quite notwithstanding the mental image which I'll put in your brains now of our glorious treasurer sent back naked from the future by Skynet, I think his true identity is actually in this favour. When the opposition loses the debate tonight, he will, at least like the T800, be able to say, "I'll be back." Next, we have Miss Vicky Price, former head of the UK government's Economic Service and successful author of Greekonomics, who has very kindly agreed to step in tonight. With such extensive economic experience, I'm sure Ms. Price will be driving home the economic arguments for the opposition in her speech later on. I have been informed that the legal points limit on one's licence is 12 points. Let's hope we don't add any tonight. But we wish her the very best with her speech. Finally, next on the opposition side, we have Mr. Alex Salmond, First Minister of Scotland between 2007 and 2014, and head of the Scottish National Party for over 20 years. Fierce advocate of Remain, who's been at the forefront of British politics for decades, he is no doubt more than qualified to speak on this subject. I have to say it's somewhat of a gamble for the opposition to have recruited him tonight, given his track record on British referendums. Regardless, we look forward to his contribution tonight. Finally, we have Lord Michael Heseltine, former Deputy Prime Minister under Sir John Major and Secretary of Defence under Margaret Thatcher, with a hugely extensive well of experience in politics. He is also, of course, most importantly, an ex-president of this House. He is not just any ex-president of this House, however. He is the man to whom credit is due for the founding of the establishment which later became known as the Purple Turtle. Never mind bringing down Miss Thatcher or the right to buy scheme. That is your crowning achievement, Lord Heseltine, and for one we are truly grateful. These are your opposition speakers tonight, Mr. President, and they are most welcome. And now, ladies and gentlemen, back to the business in hand, and the first of my 3 points for your consideration tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the fact that the EU is not the bastion of fairness, equality, and democracy that many of its supporters would have you believe. Rather, it is bureaucratic, undemocratic, and unwieldy. Ladies and gentlemen, I put it to you that the European Union is not a democratic organisation, nor does it have the means to be. Since the Lisbon Treaty of 2009, it has been affirmed that EU treaties supersede the laws put in place by the national, democratically elected parliaments of the EU constituent member states. The structure of the Union itself warrants this. That's the European Union, not the Oxford Union. The President is little more than a figurehead. The Parliament itself plays a very limited role, and it is the unelected, appointed bureaucrats who make all the important decisions. This is not an organisation which has the interests of all its member states in view. Rather, it is one in which certain individuals and groups are able to get ahead because they are able to play the system. The warning signs have been there all along. Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, has already bulldozed any romantic, naive view in democracy at the time of the elections which swept Greece and swept the anti-austerity party Syriza to power in January 2015 by saying that to suggest that everything is going to change because there's a new government in Athens is to mistake dreams for reality. There can be no democratic choice against the European treaties. To understand this element of the EU's nature is to get to the very heart of what the EU is and always has been about, the creation of a European superstate. It is branded into the very makeup of the European Union's constitution, from the ever closer union amongst the peoples of Europe, outlined in the Treaty of Rome in 1957, to what the former European Commission President José Manuel Barroso, who stood here and spoke very elegantly about 6 months ago, advocating the very same union, said in 2007, "I like to compare the EU as a creation to the organisation of empire. We have the dimensions of empire." On an even more disturbing note was the contribution of the President of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, who demanded the elimination of the Syriza government and the installation of a technocratic EU puppet government that would act on behalf of the organisation till a more compliant Greek parliament could be put in place. Tony Benn once said that if you cannot get rid of the people who govern you, you don't live in a democratic system. The reality has become the opposite, whereby those who govern in a higher organisation are able to supersede the role of democracy in a constituent member state, then surely this is time for alarm bells to start ringing. My second point, then, is that this EU solidarity that the EU should be based on, a vision of international cooperation, collaboration, and solidarity, is a fallacy. How this notion has been tarnished by the crises of the last few years, the reality could not be more different. It's an absolute shambles, this solidarity, and a complete facade. And this has been shown by two examples over the last couple of years. The first, in Greece, when the dreaded Troika ripped apart the democratically elected Syriza government, stabbed in the back by the ECB that was supposed to save it without democratic choice. Those who spread the words of this injustice over social media with the hashtag #ThisIsAcoup, completely powerless to have a say in the way in which the Commission and the ECB went about their business, as a smaller state was bullied by the Central European elite for their own gain, whilst at the same time imposing a system of austerity on Greece that would not only cripple its economy for years to come, but hamstring its state assets for decades. The second crisis is, of course, that of the refugees, which has engulfed Europe of late. Law again has fallen to the wayside as first Schengen and then the Third Treaty of Dublin fell away as states squabbled over who should take in more refugees, and yet again the big dogs came out on top. The message to the people of Europe is very clear. It is not law, it is not solidarity, it is not international cooperation that is important to the heart of the EU. It is force. It is economic and political clout that gets stuff done. This brings me perfectly onto my final point, that the EU benefits big business and multinational corporations above all. Ladies and gentlemen, as capitalist companies and firms grow, they face a contradiction. On the one hand, they are faced with the need to keep on growing in order to survive in ever more competitive national and international markets and to keep selling their goods on an ever larger scale. Yet these companies and firms are also in need of the framework that a state provides, with the infrastructure, labour and international protection that consists of. The EU and the EEC, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, are the next logical step in this progression for European big business. Individual member states are dwarfed by their transatlantic and Asian rivals, with the largest, Germany, responsible for just 5% of global GDP. In comparison, the US comes in at 23%, China at 13%, Japan at 6%. The economic logic, therefore, of the European Union is that combined, the European Union makes up 24% of the global GDP. It theoretically allows the EU to play a role on a global scale and to compete with such big markets as the US and China. It increases the size of domestic markets as well as the amount of labour available to corporations. What I put to you is that the way in which this economic argument has been framed benefits only big business. The fact that the opposition, the Remain campaign, consider trade to be the jewel in their crown of their arguments is precisely because of the influence of big business in the way the campaign and the EU has been run. It is in their interest for Britain to remain in the EU, to make the best of the perceived economic benefits that this brings, and it is in their interest to influence the Remain campaign in this way. One only has to look at the chair of the largest Remain campaign organisation, Lord Stuart Rose of Britain's Stronger in Europe, who was the former chief executive of Marks & Spencer, to see this concept in action. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to take 2 points away from what I've said tonight. The first of all is that we owe the purple turtle to Lord Michael Heseltine. The second, and far more important, is that Britain is big enough to stand on its own without the EU. We sit on the G8, the G20, the UN Security Council. We're a founding member of NATO, and crucially, if we go back to trade and the economic arguments, we are the world's 5th largest economy by GDP. And so we will compete, we can compete, and we will compete going forwards without the undemocratic, unsympathetic, and unconstitutional organisation that calls itself the European Union. Thank you very much.